Welcome back to Burning River Bushcraft. Today I'm going to show you my quest for the ultimate wool sweater for the outdoorsman. Now my first choice in a wool outer layer is going to be either a wool anorak or a wool blanket shirt. A dense weave on a wool like this blanket here gives you all the benefits of wool as far as insulating properties, but it's a much tougher, denser fabric. You're much less likely to snag this being outside. When it gets really cold, I like to layer a wool sweater underneath my anorak. That gives me extra bulk. I can take the anorak off if I'm around a camp setting. A wool sweater gives you a lot of range of movement. It's not a real constricting garment. So that's why I chose to look into a wool sweater. Now my first wool sweater I purchased was a lot like this one. This is a Cabela's 100% wool. It's like a 3-button, pretty classic look. Nice woodsy type color to it. However, this has a liner to it. So this has like a wind shear liner. Now I noticed I said this was not my first one. My first one got washed accidentally and dried, and it's about that big now. So definitely wasn't working out, so I upgraded to a bigger size. That way, in case it happens to shrink up again, you know, I got a little room for error. So the main thing I did not like about the Cabela's sweater is that it's got this polyester lining in it. Now, some days this is great. One thing about wool, it is breathable and it is not wind resistant. So when you're outside on a cold, windy day, that wind cuts right through you. So that's why you need to have a shell on top of the wool that's going to be able to block the wind. So this liner works great for what it does. It does keep the wind down. I still like to go to a sweater like this when I'm hunting. But for, you know, hiking outside, any type of bushcrafting, camping type things, as I peel off my layers, my base layer was always wet because I couldn't sweat fast enough through this polyester lining. So when this shrunk up, I definitely lucked the sweater. I wanted to replace it with a duplicate, but there's definitely something else better out there. So I'm the type of guy that does not like to shop. So when I was looking for wool sweaters, I went on Amazon first. The one thing about Amazon is you can't really feel the thickness of the sweater. So if you look at how thin this is compared to the Cabela's lined version, you know, you can see right now this is almost like a dress sweater. This is a light fall sweater at best, possibly like a dress sweater. I was looking for something in like a muted earth type tone. You know, I don't need to be camouflaged up all the time, but I do like to blend in when I'm out in the woods. This sweater, I can see the camera through the sweater. That's not a good sign when you're looking for insulation. But it did have a zipper that lets me vent. This sweater I can sweat through no problem. So there was no perspiration issues, no buildup. That's the one thing I liked about it. So, you know, I like the style. This would be like the earliest of fall seasons, or you'd have to have multiple of these sweaters. Very, very thin. So I did a lot of research on wool sweaters. What did the old-time sportsmen used to wear? What was different about the sweaters they have then as opposed to what we have now? And the one thing I kept coming back to was oiled wool. So I had to look it up. You know, I had no experience with an oiled wool sweater, and what I found was an Irish fisherman sweater. So I went on eBay and I was able to find a oiled wool sweater. This is actually made in Ireland. This is a fisherman style sweater. So what oiled wool is the lanolin that's naturally in sheep's wool is left in the wool during the process. So what you get is a water resistant fabric. So I have wore this outside. I wear this quite a bit, usually underneath something. So you have all the breathability that you do with normal wool. But when I have one of my top layers off and this is exposed, you know, any mist, any little water that's in the air builds up on the sweater and really doesn't penetrate. It's pretty cool. You know, the negative to this is this thing gets heavy when it gets wet. Now, if you look, it's got a coarse weave to it. That's the pattern of the fisherman sweater. What that does is it adds bulk. So this is one of the thicker sweaters that I have, and it's definitely one of the warmer sweaters I have. One cool thing about the Irish fisherman's pattern is this was a family pattern. So different family groups would have different individual patterns. That way, when you fell overboard, drowned, and were washed up on shore, your family was able to identify your corpse by your sweater pattern. Now, this is a great sweater. I really do like it. It does have some disadvantages. First off, it has an odor to it. The lanolin definitely has a smell. It doesn't smell bad, but you can tell when you've got it on. The other thing that I don't really care for about it is the color. Again, I try to blend in with the woods a little bit, and when I've got this on, I feel like I should be whistling the Irish Spring commercial. It definitely doesn't blend in well at all. So what I'm going to try to do today is dye this oiled wool sweater in some black walnut dye. So this wool sweater should be a good candidate to take a dye from a black walnut. Some of the things I'm interested in, it's got a fleck pattern to it. You know, there's just a trace of a different color yarn mixed through it. I'm kind of interested on how that's going to work. And the other thing, like I said, this is oiled, so I don't know what's going to happen with the black walnut. It might take the oil out of this. Now, there is a process to re-oil a sweater, and you know, depending how the outcome is, I might have to go into that. So I made walnut dye in a previous video. Now, I've been busy this week processing walnut hulls, boiling it down, filtering it through, so I have jars of black walnut dye. And I have a clean 5-gallon bucket here, so the process is going to be as simple as it sounds. You know, in goes my, there you can see, naturally oiled wool sweater. And in goes the dye. Okay, there's one last shot of the pristine off-white made in Ireland oiled wool sweater. Now you can see how the liquid rolls off that oiled wool. So we can see that it's definitely changing its color. The challenge is going to be to get it to take the color evenly throughout the whole sweater. So that's going to be me continually working this. You know, I wouldn't have minded to have more dye in here, but this was quite a bit. This sweater soaks it up big time, but I am able to compress this, as you can see, and submerge the sweater. So I'm going to give this at least a day. I'm going to continually rotate this sweater, making sure it's all, you know, thoroughly soaked and I don't have any white spots at the end. So my boiled wool sweater's been soaking in the black walnut dye for a little bit less than 24 hours now. I'll give you a shot of it here. It really soaked up the dye. I continually rotated the sweater throughout the evening. I would push down on it, you know, make sure the thing is entirely saturated with the dye. Right now I'm going to try to strain most of this water, or I'm sorry, most of the dye out of the bucket, and then we're going to dry the sweater off. Now you got to be careful with this, because if you were to stretch it, you know, obviously the sweater is going to maintain that stretched out shape when you're done, and you're not going to want to hang this to dry. You're going to lay it on a smooth, flat surface. So obviously, you know, this black walnut extract is pretty potent dye. So how do you transfer that in the house? Very carefully. You know, I am getting on this table. This table is going to be stained. You know, obviously my hands are stained also. But I added this large jar plus 3.5 smaller jars. And you see how much I got out of there easily. I'm going to get a second bucket, and I'm going to actually try to wring the sweater out and leave most of the dye in the original bucket. Okay, so you kind of see the color that we're ending up with. About what I expected, actually. And this is what I was able to squeeze out of there. Okay, now I've been able to reserve, you know, one of these bigger jars. I'm not sure what this is, a quart. And then the smaller jar, I think this is a pint. So I was able to reserve, you know, this much of the walnut dye. So I've got 2.5 smaller jars in the sweater. Now I was careful, or trying to be careful, you know, not to really squeeze and twist the sweater when it's in its wet state like that, because like I said, you can really, you know, deform the thing. So what I'm going to do now is go ahead and clean this table off, and I'll lay something down, and then I will lay the sweater on top of it out flat and let it dry like that. Now, of course, you know, the walnut's going to stain it. That's a no-brainer. The one thing I was kind of looking forward to seeing was like that little fleck pattern that was in there. You can still see it through the fabric, but the main thing is the oiled wool. Did it retain the oil in there, or did it get you know, taken out by the walnut extract? My thought is, you know, because this isn't a soap, it's not going to break down any oil. It should still be in there. So this is a natural way to dye that without disturbing the natural lanolin that's in the oil, that's in the wool itself. You could see as I was pouring the dye on the sweater the first time, you could see how the water was, you know, kind of beating up on it and washing away. Now again, you're not going to be able to go out in a rainstorm in an oiled wool sweater and stay dry, but on those cold, misty mornings where everything seems to be, you know, damp and creeping in on you cold, that's kind of what that type of sweater's for. So here's how the oiled wool fisherman sweater finished out. You know, this is a great color. I'm more than happy with it. This definitely blends in pretty well with any outdoor activity, and I'm definitely going to wear it a lot more you know, not looking like I'm entering an ugly sweater contest. So the key component with this was the oiled wool. Did the oil wash out of it? And as soon as it started to dry, I could smell that natural lanolin in the sweater. So I'm going to give that a positive that it did not rinse out. I do not have to re-oil this sweater. So now that this has been a proven process that I can dye an oiled wool sweater without losing the oil in it, I think my next step is going to be to try to find maybe a Goodwill sweater. I've been looking for quite a while. I have not found one in my size that's 100% wool yet, but try to find one in my size. I'm kind of running low on black walnut dye. I might have to go to a commercial dye, but go ahead and dye it to a more appropriate color, add oil to the sweater, and then you know, see how that works out. So that might save me a step in searching for a specific oiled wool sweater. You know, but for now I'm happy with this. This is exactly what I've been looking for. So go ahead and you know, look around, see if you can find one for yourself. If you find a sweater in a less desirable color, you know, definitely try to dye it. This has been Jamie Boggs with Burning River Bushcraft. See you next time.